We went about our last week loving in a holy, holy way. Never wavered from that thought for a moment. And all those around us loved right back in return in a holy, holy way. Man, that makes it easy. But boy, are we stubborn when it comes to loving. Boy, can we be conditional with our loving. Boy, do we like to hang on to it and keep it to ourselves. But today we are here to look at, to examine, what does it really take to walk a path of holiness? And so, as we enter into this talk of what I want to share with you about, I want to introduce a word that you may or may not be familiar with. You may have been brought up with it, and it may be ingrained into your belief system and a great understanding of what it means and how to practice it in a theological setting. And the word is called kenosis. And it's a Greek word meaning empty, or too empty, or emptiness. So, how it's used in the spiritual practice of growing on the spiritual path is that sometimes we approach a subject, a concept, a belief, a new perspective or new idea, and in order to really embrace it, we need to empty ourselves of everything that we may have learned about that subject matter previously. So is there anything in your life that you could, if you would benefit by, if you emptied your current belief system around and started afresh? And let me give you an idea of how that would work, because the first time that I practiced it unknowingly was as a 10-year-old. And what happened at 10, on my birthday, my grandma gave me my first tennis racket. And those of you that have been through Free the Heart Net think that that racket has been meant to release our anger, which is not a bad thing to empty out of our life, but boy, do we like to hang on to it. But how I practiced that kenosis was I began learning to play tennis by hitting consistently a tennis ball up against a back wall. And that wall would just return the ball back, and I learned quickly that I could, when I hit it with my forehand, I got really good at getting it to come right back. And I noticed that when I hit it with my backhand, I wasn't as good. So you know what I kept practicing on? The part that I was good at. Anybody done that? And so I kept going like this, and I got really good, and then I'd get to play, and somebody would invite me to play at 10 years old, and I'd get on the court, and what I'd do is I would favor my forehand by standing left of center court. So I'd move over and stand on the left side of the court, always hoping that the person would hit the ball to my right. For an average or beginner tennis player, this concept is okay. And so I got where I was pretty good. I was always a very good athlete as a child, and I got where I could beat most people my age and some older, because what would happen is when they discovered that I didn't have such a good backhand, I would do what's called run around my backhand to my forehand. And so I got where I could kind of get the ball over left hand, but boy, was I good with my forehand. And I kept doing that for a couple of years, and I got to where I could beat most people that I would play against. Until one time when I was down in Long Beach in Southern California at my grandma's house, and I went next door to the high school tennis courts, and I was over there playing, hitting the ball up against the back wall. And as it was coming back to me, this guy happened to be standing on the tennis courts, and he looked and he goes, wow, that guy's pretty good. He says, would you like to come play with me? And me, without thinking, said, sure. So I get on the court, and he hits the first few balls of the game to my forehand, and he sees me run around my backhand to my forehand. Well, about the next 45 balls came to my backhand. And the further I kept favoring my forehand and trying to run around, before long he's hitting it to the other side of the court and I couldn't get to it. Didn't know that I'd been invited to play against the high school coach of Long Beach Wilson, one of the most successful tennis teams in the country at the time. And within a few short minutes of him teaching me, he says, you need to let go of everything you've ever learned about playing tennis and start anew by learning to dominate with your backhand. A moment of emptying everything that I had known about tennis up until that point. Where I want to share and bring that concept into us today is I want you for a moment to empty everything that you've ever been taught about Jesus. Can you do that? I don't know if this would happen if I was at Glad Tidings, the Pentecostal church down the street, but I want to challenge you for a moment to empty your mind of all that you've ever been told, read, preached to, ingrained, forced down, shoved down, force-fed around your understanding about Jesus. Can you do that for a moment? Can we have a moment of kenosis? Kenosis, I hope I'm saying that right. Close enough. So with that, I want to examine the historical Jesus. The historical Jesus. Hear what I'm saying? Because today we're here to examine, to interpret, and to explore the meaning of Jesus and the resurrection as we open ourselves to a season of renewal, of rejuvenation, and rebirth. But before we get into this more, let's look at what the historical Jesus really was. For the evidence of the existence of Jesus all comes after his lifetime. That's a key phrase. After. Not during, after. As a result, some critics argue that biblical scholars have created the historical Jesus in their own image. A small number of scholars believe the gospel accounts are so mythical in nature that nothing, not even the very existence of Jesus, can be determined from them. Kenosis, emptying. I know I might be challenging some past belief systems in there. Amazingly, the question of an actual historical Jesus rarely confronts the religious believer. Is that true? How many traditional, practicing, hardcore Christians ever think about the actual historical Jesus and question? The power of faith has so forcefully driven the minds of most believers and even apologetic scholars that the question of reliable evidence gets obscured by tradition, religious deception, and outrageous claims. The following gives a brief outlook about the claims of a historical Jesus and why the evidence the Christians present us cannot serve as justification for reliable evidence for a historical Jesus. All claims of Jesus derive from hearsay accounts. Listen to that. This is unquestionable. And here's why. No one has the slightest physical evidence to support a physical, historical Jesus. No artifacts, dwelling, works of carpentry, or self-written manuscripts. All claims about Jesus derive from writings of other people. There occurs no contemporary Roman record that shows Pontius Pilate executing a man named Jesus. Devastating to historians, there occurs not a single contemporary writing of Jesus' life, during Jesus' life, that mentions Jesus in them. All documents about Jesus came well after the life of the alleged Jesus from either unknown authors, people who have never met an earthly Jesus, or from fraudulent, mythical, or allegorical writings. Although no one can argue that many of these writings came from fraud or interpolations, which means to alter or deliberately falsify a text by adding a comment or extra words to it. That even if these sources did not come from interpolations, they still could not serve as reliable evidence for a historical Jesus simply because all sources about Jesus derive from hearsay accounts. Does hearsay work in a court system? No. Why? Hearsay means information derived from other people rather than on a witness's own knowledge. Courts of law do not generally allow hearsay as testimony. Nor does honest, modern scholarship. Hearsay does not provide good evidence, and therefore we should dismiss it. If you do not understand this, imagine for a moment that you've been confronted with a charge for a crime which you know you did not commit. Got that for a moment? Imagine you're being charged with a crime that you did not do. You feel confident that no one can prove your guilt because you know that there exists no evidence whatsoever for the charge against you. Now imagine that you stand present in a court of law that allows hearsay as evidence. When the prosecution presents its case, everyone who takes the stand against you claims that you committed the crime, not as a witness themselves, but solely because they claim other people said so. None of these other people, mind you, ever show up in court, nor can you find any of them. Hearsay does not work as evidence because we have no way of knowing whether the person lied or simply based his or her information on wrongful belief or bias. We know from history about witchcraft trials and kangaroo courts that hearsay provides neither reliable nor fair statements of evidence. It derives from these reasons why hearsay cannot serve as good evidence, and the same reasoning must go against the claims of a historical Jesus or any other historical person. For example, a historian today who writes about the life of George Washington, of course, cannot serve as an eyewitness, but she can provide citations to documents which give personal or eyewitness accounts. None of the historians about Jesus give reliable sources to eyewitnesses. Therefore, all we have remains as hearsay. The consensus of many biblical historians put the dating of the earliest gospel, that of Mark, at some time after 70 CE, Common Era, and the last gospel, John, after 90 CE. This would make it some 40 years after the alleged crucifixion of Jesus that we have any gospel writings that mention him. 40 years. I want you to imagine right now, 40 years from now, you got to write about this service and who was here and what happened. 40 years from now. What did you have for breakfast 2 weeks ago? Wednesday. 2 weeks. Yeah, or this morning for Heather. What did you have for breakfast this morning? So the editing and formation of the Bible came from members of the early Christian church. Since the fathers of the church possessed the scriptoria and determined what would appear in the Bible. Is that a pretty controlling position to be in? There occurred plenty of opportunity and motive to change, modify, or create text that might bolster the position of the church or the members of the church themselves. Oh. Well, that explains it. Last part on this. In attempting to salvage the Bible, the respected revisionist and scholar Bruce Metzger has written extensively on the problems of the New Testament. In his book, The Text of the New Testament, Its Transmission, Corruption, and Restoration, Metzger states this: if not for the errors arising from faulty eyesight, errors arising from faulty hearing, errors of the mind, errors of judgment, we otherwise have an accurate historical and geographical document. So here is an example of the impact a single error can have on a historical document. A young monk arrives at a monastery, and he's assigned to helping other monks in copying the old canons and laws of the church by hand. He notices, however, that all of the monks are copying from copies, not from the original manuscript. So the new monk goes to the head abbot, to ask this question, pointing out that if someone ever made even a small error in the first copy, it would never be picked up. In fact, that error would be continued in all the subsequent copies. The head monk says, "We've been copying from the copies for centuries, but you make a good point, my son." So he goes down into the dark caves underneath the monastery where the original manuscripts are held as archives in a locked vault that hasn't been opened for hundreds of years. Hours go by and nobody sees the old abbot. So the young monk gets worried and goes down to look for him. He sees the monk banging his head against the wall and wailing and wailing. We missed the R. We missed the R. We missed the R. His forehead is all bruised and he's crying uncontrollably. The young monk asked the old abbot, "What's wrong, Father?" With a choking voice, the old abbot replies, the word was celebrate. One letter. So the church had such power over people that to question the church could result in death. Regardless of what the church claimed, most people simply believed what the priest told them. Period. So to today, and our understanding of Jesus. Whether Jesus really did indeed live, whether he was a preacher and a teacher, whether he was crucified and indeed reappeared 3 days is really irrelevant. That is, unless you possess a psychological need for the unspoken comfort of needing a physical presence known as Yeshua ben Yosef to have actually lived and walked the earth over 2,011 years ago. But if the mystical of energy of all that is good about spirit incarnated in a being that Jesus so beautifully represents lives in your heart, does it matter if he really walked the earth or not? So what is the metaphoric allegory of the crucifixion attempting to teach us? And is something that happened that long ago relevant to our lives today? And is there a lesson that is applicable to helping us improve our current lives? So intertwining those with what we've been working on since the second Sunday of January, when we have powerfully combined the teaching methods and principles and healing steps of the 12-step program as well as the promises of AA, and we've combined them with 12 New Thought universal spiritual principles and 12 spiritual action steps. And so today we look at the fourth one as the fourth week of April comes before us. Is we will come to grips with our burdens, mistakes, and secrets. So when I first looked at this at the beginning of the week, and I started looking at this about February, what will I talk about on Easter that will intertwine, work within, combine, work harmoniously around the Easter story and this? At first I thought, no, that's not going to work. I'll just skip this week as far as the 12-step. But then I realized that as I prayed and meditated over this, that it really is the perfect metaphoric allegory of the crucifixion and what it is attempting to teach us. The metaphoric message is really very simple. The message is a human being, and listen to me on this one. You can bet the house on this one. A human being can never destroy another spirit. A human being can never destroy another spirit, regardless of what one may do to another, even if it means the ultimate attempt for humiliation and defilement, even if it means driving nails through one's limbs and placing them on a cross. One human being cannot destroy another spirit. Do you understand that? And when we believe and embrace it and feel it, do you know what we can conquer? What does Jesus conquer over it? Death. Because nothing that another human being can do to another can ever harm the spirit. Don't confuse the physical body with the spirit. Because this physical body ceases to be for one reason or another on this earthly plane, that leaving behind does not stop, destroy, or annihilate the spirit. We can never harm another spirit. Wow. Boy, do we got to let a lot of people off on that one. Boy, do we got to let ourselves go and free ourselves up. Let's examine, though, humiliation closer. For it's one of the worst traits existing in humanity's ego. False ego. It is the fear of humiliation that causes us to carry our burdens. It's one of the meanest behaviors that we can abuse others with. There is another word that is even stronger than humiliation, and the word is mortification. It is derived from mors, the Latin word for death, as in the term mortician for undertaker. To be mortified is to feel so humiliated you would rather bury yourself 6 feet under than share your burdens with your loved ones, friends, or spiritual community. Anybody have one of those burdens that you just can't imagine sharing? Or if you had a choice, you would prefer not to have to walk through city streets crowded with hostile people, carrying a large cross on your back and a crown of thorns piercing your skull. This is called being exposed through humiliation. So, is there anything from this moment backwards? If you look back from the last moment that just passed to the beginning of your life, that you believe 1,000,000 billion % that if anyone knew this about you, you would feel completely humiliated, exposed, and mortified? If so, these are your burdens. And today, the story is about teaching us that regardless of how mortified we may feel at any given moment, there is a power for good greater than us that we can trust and that we can have faith in to help us carry our burdens when our burdens become too great. Is that a message that is relevant to today's life? What burdens are you carrying that you feel are too great to share? So you shoulder the full weight of them yourself. Is there something that has happened to you long ago? Is there something that happened long ago relevant to our lives today in the story of the crucifixion? In the fourth step, it says, we will come to grips with our mistakes. How many of you have made a life-changing decision in the pressure or heat of the moment? I'll marry you. Sure. I'll have a kid with you. Sure. I'll go out with you. Sure. And that heat of the moment could be you decided to get married because a baby was on its way, because there was an ending to a relationship or a beginning of a relationship. Perhaps that mistake felt because you took a drink after years of sobriety. You drove when you shouldn't have. You said yes when you meant to say no. You took your eye off of your child when you should have kept your eye on your child. And for one reason or another, the mistake impacted your life. And since, you have had a hard time seeing any good in the future. Anybody have one of those? Watch this video. It's as poignant as it comes in explaining the modern story, the modern day story, or the ancient story of the crucifixion in a modern day story. does that lead to a renewal of life? Kenosis is defined as the process of the self emptying the self of self. So is there anything in your personality, a trait, a behavior, a habit, an incident, that if you emptied yourself of it, you may find yourself a lot happier? And as importantly, or more importantly, the people around you would be a lot happier, such as your anger, for starters. Are you a very determined person? Which isn't a bad thing to be. But when things don't go your way, you tend to get very angry. When your family doesn't behave a certain way. When your partner thinks for themselves. When coworkers, well, you get the idea. So how about an addiction? How about perfectionism, codependency, narrow-mindedness, fears, wounds from the past, victim thinking, low self-esteem, pessimism? What if you emptied yourself of any and all of these behaviors? Would not these mistakes, would not these burdens be our key to resurrection, which is simply awakening to a new sense of ourself? Would they not take us, and when we're in the midst of the mistakes, in the midst of carrying those burdens, and we allow ourselves to feel it, does it not take us to a point where something greater than us is stirred inside of us, and an energy upwells inside of us, allowing us to go through whatever it is that we may have to go through? Whether it's a funeral of a son or a daughter, or the loss of a parent, or perhaps having to carry a burden, a cross, through a street of people, and to have stakes driven through your hands and your shins. Perhaps there is something inside of us that is so strong that it is unshakable. And when we tap into that, it resurrects us to a new understanding that we are greater than our mistakes, greater than our burdens, and greater than our secrets that we carry. And when we reawaken to how magnificent, and continuing to unfold and embrace that concept more and more each and every day, we feel a greater connection to the glory, to the beauty, to the transcending essence of that which we were created out of. And when we catch a glimpse of that magnificence, we then see that so much energy that we spend living less than, seeing people as less than, of needing to make ourselves better by seeing people as less than, through our criticisms, through our judgments, through our condemnations, we catch that magnificent glimpse that opens an inner understanding that we are greater than this human existence, but yet we are a part of this human existence. And Jesus was the transcending, transformational concept that has been brought into many millions upon billions of lives to open the door to how magnificent a spiritual being can be in a physical body, whether he existed or not. You exist. And the consciousness of the Christ is the consciousness of you. Jesus never said, what is within me is not within you. The Father that is within me, meaning Spirit, meaning our higher power, is the Father or the higher power that is within you. And there are times where our burdens, our secrets, and our mistakes cover up that understanding and that truth. And sometimes it takes our burdens, our mistakes, our secrets to awaken to that which has been laying asleep. But it never leaves us. And that is the essence, to me, of the Easter message. The Christ that is within me salutes the Christ that is within you.